Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating evolution of Marvel's most mystical, absolutely mind-bending character, Dr. Stephen Strange. We're going to trace his incredible journey right from his roots as a niche 1960s psychedelic comic strip all the way to becoming this central multi-billion-dollar pillar of modern cinema. It is quite the ride, so let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this question really gets to the absolute core of who this character is. In the comic book world, heroes are usually born from this profound sense of justice, right? Or maybe a tragic need to avenge the innocent. But Stephen Strange? He doesn't start out wanting to save the world. Not at all. He's a brilliant, but let's be honest, incredibly egotistical neurosurgeon who only cares about his own wealth and status. So how does that guy become Earth's Sorcerer Supreme? Section 1. An unlikely superhero origin. To really put this into perspective, let's contrast Doctor Strange with a more traditional action hero archetype. Think of someone like John Wick. Wick's path is carved out of earthly vengeance and tactical combat, right? But Doctor Strange? After a devastating car accident completely destroys the nerves in his hands, he isn't out for revenge. He's out for physical healing. He doesn't get bitten by a radioactive bug. His origin is actually much closer to a martial arts film. It relies heavily on rigorous training, intense discipline, and mentorship under the Ancient One. Following this timeline really shows us the architecture of his redemption. It literally starts with a car crash, the physical destruction of his hands, which fundamentally shatters his massive ego. And that leads to the search, where he basically exhausts all his wealth and travels to the Himalayas seeking the mythical Ancient One for a cure. But here is the crucial pivot, the choice. The Ancient One flat out refuses to just fix his hands. Instead, she offers to teach him the mystic arts. Strange actually has to let go of his selfishness to protect his mentor from a rival student, Baron Mordo. And that one selfless act, that leads to his destiny. The fascinating takeaway here is that Strange wasn't looking for redemption at all, but, through the stripping away of his ego, he found it anyway.
Moving on to Section 2, Silver Age Psychedelia.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the entire visual foundation of Doctor Strange was actually not Stan Lee's idea. Believe it or not, it came directly from the brilliant mind of artist Steve Ditko. As Ditko himself noted in this quote, he brought a fully penciled 5-page concept to Lee completely on his own. He was just looking to inject a different kind of variety into Marvel's lineup.
So he debuted as a mere backup story in Strange Tales issue 1010 back in July 1963. Stan Lee actually drew inspiration from the 1930s radio program Chandu the Magician for the character's overall vibe, but man, it was Ditko's art that made it legendary. Influenced by Salvador Dali, M.C. Escher, and Cubism, Ditko rendered these surrealist, dimension-hopping landscapes that were honestly unlike anything else in comics at the time. I mean, it perfectly captured the 1960s psychedelic movement. In fact, these tricky visual renderings of the astral plane and alternate dimensions made Doctor Strange a massive, unexpected counterculture hit, especially among college students of that era.
All right, Section 3, Mastering the Mystic Arts. You see, his magic isn't just random energy blasts. It's a highly structured system on the page. For example, you have artifacts like the Eye of Agamotto, an all-seeing relic used to dispel illusions and amplify psychic awareness. Then you have the verbal invocations. When Strange yells, "Hoary hosts of Hoggoth," he is actively tapping into the power of a specific patron deity. Or when he invokes the shades of the Seraphim, he's summoning impenetrable mystical energy barriers to shield himself. The magic is deeply, deeply rooted in this vast, unseen cosmic hierarchy. But here's a pretty funny piece of behind-the-scenes trivia for you. Despite how incredibly detailed this magical system appears, Stan Lee openly admitted he had absolutely no idea what any of these incantations actually meant. He didn't have some grand mythological encyclopedia sitting on his desk. He just thought words like hoary hosts of Hoggoths sounded incredibly mysterious and mystical. It was purely about atmospheric world building.
Section 4, Evolution Across the Multiverse.
A perfect example of how this character evolved over time is the 1986 graphic novel Doctor Strange Into Shambhala by J.M. DeMatteis. Shambhala, which is a mystical realm rooted in Eastern mythology, serves as the backdrop for this heavy, introspective journey. The story leaned way into Eastern spirituality, dealing with the illusions of reality and the burden of human apotheosis. The protagonist is forced to struggle with his own inner turmoil and philosophical musings, rather than just going out and battling a monster of the week. It really showed that Strange's ultimate battleground was more often than not his own mind.
But translating these mind-bending concepts to live action, well, that was a massive challenge. Back in 1978, CBS attempted a live-action TV pilot starring Peter Hooton, and let's just say it was a critical and ratings disaster. The visual effects of the 1970s simply could not recreate Ditko's geometric dimensions. They were basically reduced to these low-budget video feedback loops. Fast forward to 2016, though, and modern CGI had finally caught up to the comic's imagination. This resulted in a critical and commercial blockbuster triumph starring Benedict Cumberbatch.
Which brings us to Section 5, the modern cinematic sorcerer.
Benedict Cumberbatch didn't just put on a cape for this one, he brought a wealth of personal and professional experience to the role. Did you know he actually spent his gap year teaching English in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Darjeeling? That gave him a really profound, real-world connection to the spirituality of the story. And on a physical level, to make the magic look authentic, he studied complex balletic finger-tutting movements with dancer J-Funk. They literally treated spellcasting as highly dynamic choreography. And, from a personality standpoint, Cumberbatch noted that Strange's intelligent arrogance perfectly mirrored his famous portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. Director Scott Derrickson and his team knew they had to avoid the standard superhero trope of just shooting laser beams from their hands. Instead, they focused on tactile magic, creating these complex mandalas of light as shields and utilizing reality-bending geometry. And this brilliantly illustrates how the filmmakers honored Steve Ditko's original surreal artwork. They basically turned the very fabric of reality into a visual weapon. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. In a cinematic universe filled with super soldiers, literal gods, and hulking monsters obsessed with physical strength, just look at Stephen Strange. His entire journey started with the violent destruction of his greatest asset, his hands and, by extension, his towering ego. He had to realize he knew absolutely nothing in order to learn everything. So I leave you with this. Is his ability to conjure interdimensional portals his true strength? Or is Doctor Strange's ultimate superpower actually his humility? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see the Sorcerer Supreme on screen. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.